Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to this Fleet Europe webinar on unlocking the benefits of private leasing for employees ineligible for a company car. My name is Steven Schroefs and I have the pleasure to be the moderator of this long-anticipated webinar. The information given is for information purposes only and can't be reproduced or distributed without prior permission of Fleet Europe. Private leasing is the topic of the day, and private leasing is fast gaining ground across Europe with an annual volume increase of around 50%, depending on the country. Private lease is a longer-term leasing solution offered to the end customer. So, strictly speaking, private leasing does not require the involvement of corporates, as it's a deal between the supplier and the end consumer. But companies can serve as ideal matchmakers between their employees and the private leasing suppliers. And so, in this configuration, everybody wins. The employees get cost-attractive access to a clever formula for individual mobility. The suppliers, they get access to a substantial number of potential clients, and the employers can add an incentive to their benefits package. How private leasing can benefit both your company and your employees can be discovered in this new webinar supported by Arval. Three experts speaking will deep dive into the topic. We have Octavian Chelu, Principal Consultant Fleet and Leasing at Frost & Sullivan, Lakshmi Moorthy, SME and Private Lease Director at Arval, and Carsten Esbach, Chief Operations Officer at BNP Paribas Germany, and he will bring a case study. At the end of this webinar, there is of course a Q&A with our experts. You can ask your questions to our experts by using the chat function. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now introduce our first speaker, and may I welcome Octavian Chelu of Frost & Sullivan, who will picture the transformation of the leasing business. Octavian, I hope that you are in the webinar room. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Stephen. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me as well.
Exactly. So, Octavian, we are really happy that you can be with us today and that you can share a little bit of insights and statistics and figures about the leasing market and how the leasing market will develop.
Exactly, Stephen. So, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for having me here today, and welcome again to all the attendees. What I will be doing today throughout my presentation is basically set the scene. And I will be talking about the general market setup, the main customer segments, and a couple of the main influencing factors in the overall leasing industry, and private leasing in particular, of course. Without further ado, let us proceed. So basically, I would like to start by putting things in perspective, as mentioned, at a higher scale. So here, basically on this slide, I showcase what are the main influencing factors for the vehicle leasing industry in general. We see developments like EV leasing, mobility as a service, or digitization that are expected to influence the setup and the way in which the leasing industry is going to function as a whole. Also, we have identified certain areas where leasing is being promoted aggressively, like within the SME and private segments, for example. At the same time, you can see highlighted on the slide both private leasing as well as vehicle subscription solutions. And I will explain more about why in the upcoming slide. So moving on to the next slide. In this area, we see the evolution of the private leasing powered only through operational leasing, and I want to stress this out, up to 2022 when compared with the total retail vehicle registrations estimated also up to 2022. And just to put things in perspective across the main regions, in US, for example, private leasing is a very popular vehicle financing solution, registering growth rates of 13% yearly for the past 5 to 6 years. The penetration rate is also quite high. We're talking about almost 27% from the total retail new vehicle registration. In Europe, on the other hand, private leasing sees a lot of traction in the past couple of years, as also the mindset of the people starts to change from a vehicle ownership to a vehicle usership type of an approach. And at the same time, private leasing is being promoted aggressively, as I mentioned. So we are also talking about educating the market, if you'd like, in a number of countries in the Western and Nordic part of Europe. With regards to the rest of the world evolution, the rest of the world, I would say it's heavily influenced by big markets and countries in Asia, where private leasing is basically non-existent. And this has, again, something to do with the mindset of the people, for which in most of the cases, the vehicle is still a status symbol. So they are not interested in leasing the vehicle, but most of the time they are purchasing it outright. We do not expect to see major changes in this region in a short to medium period of time, as the local players also, they need to invest a lot in promoting the solution and educating the market. What is important to see over here is the fact that the numbers overall are increasing for private leasing, but less when compared to the overall retail market evolution, which translates basically into the fact that there is an increased opportunity for private leasing to gain market share. The success of it can be impacted also by the evolution of the credit lines and the interest rate. So what I mean by this is that a low interest rate in a certain country or a certain region can basically ensure an increased adoption rate of credit, again, private markets or private lease. So this is something just to keep an eye open for and basically see how the market evolves. Moving on to the next slide. Over here, basically, I'm diving even deeper with regards to what countries are leading the charge of private leasing in Europe this time. A big ratio, as you can see, is coming from UK, where a particularity of the market in UK is that 95% of passenger vehicles and 100% of light commercial vehicles in private lease go into the private contract hire, so the so-called PCH type of contract. And that happens because PCH is a simpler to market product from a provider point of view. And it's easier to understand and worry about from a user perspective. So this only to understand and to detail a bit why the high adoption in UK. But overall in Europe, except the G5 countries, the popularity of the product is not very high. We do expect to see in future countries like Spain or Italy, for example, gaining some ground with regards to the adoption rate, mainly because of the private individuals understanding the benefits of private lease, such as the fixed amount per month that you have to pay, including all the services and basically the worry-free end of contract experience that it can provide. Next to this, the Nordics and the big markets will also continue to grow, followed by an increased adoption rate in new markets such as Belgium and Central Europe region, where a lot of providers offer private leasing at this moment as an employee advantage type of product to start with. In the future, UK's ratio within the total product registration is going to slightly decrease, but only due to the fact that further developed countries or the product is going to further develop in certain countries. So that's the only factor that is going to influence this type of evolution. From a CAGR point of view, as you can see on the screen, the UK private lease registration will grow with almost 2% in the analyzed period. As already mentioned, the reasons for growth are also sustained by aggressive promotional campaigns from the financing entities, either independent or captives, that in the past couple of years have invested a lot in promoting the private lease product directly in the most common retail shopper places, like supermarkets or big chain stores and so on. Next to this, we can also witness a lot of TV and online campaigns promoting private lease offer. And all of this is basically set to ensure a sustainable growth of private lease in the next period. Moving on to the next slide. On this slide, basically, in order to summarize it, it is important to understand that building a retail customer base via online channels and investment in growing markets will aid definitely financing companies' growth in the private lease market. It has already been noticed that in mature markets in Western Europe, for example, private lease can actually help driving the growth of operational lease in an otherwise quite stable market. Improving, extending product features, and developing online sales channels will expand market visibility of both the main players as well as of the product benefits. Here, we are talking again about digitization, where, for example, it can play a very important and high role as companies and providers need to focus on providing as much as possible a complete online experience. So in the aim is to basically manage to turn the online visitor into actual buyers or users, if you'd like. Moving on to the next slide. In this slide, we can see an example of the main customer segments that are being either interested or targeted by private lease offers. Starting with young people looking to drive their first vehicle and moving along the scale up to sharing economy concept, allowing people, for example, to get an easier access to vehicles in order to drive for Uber, as well as people going through a job change or the self-employed looking to unburden themselves of administrative responsibilities, and even retired people no longer entitled to a company vehicle are focus segments for private leasing. However, what is not shown on this slide are the employees who are not eligible for a company car that can still be targeted by companies like, in this case, Arval, most of the times via a business to consumer solution. Moving on to the next slide. I was stating in the beginning of the presentation about the fact that I would like to briefly mention why vehicle subscription is highlighted next to the private leasing solution. Following extensive research conducted by Frost & Sullivan, we believe that on the long run, vehicle subscription has the capability and the potential to be a worthy competitor for private leasing, especially if implemented by the main OEMs as a solution for the mass market as well. And I'm saying as well because, well, the vehicle subscription solution started initially as a premium type of offering. So for the mass market, if they are going to change this, then it might become actually really important. Just to briefly explain what does vehicle subscription do, in order to keep it simple, we think of it as being a vehicle financing solution that provides access to a vehicle by the month, hence the term subscription. As at the moment, there are a lot of iterations of this product, and the product is still being tweaked and tested a lot. But at its core, it's meant to offer increased flexibility when compared to leasing in terms of the contract length, which it should be monthly in most of the cases, and provides an easier vehicle swap option according to the driver needs. This is something to keep an eye on for the next year. That's why it's over here. It's interesting to notice the development of this particular product and see how it can overlap with the private leasing types of offering. And moving on to the last slide of my presentation for the day, basically what I would like to stress out, and I'm not going to read the information on the slide, but what I want to stress out is that the fact that there is a lot of room to grow in terms of market share and market penetration, but there is also a lot of room for providers to improve. For example, in terms of offers that are being provided to market, the online experience and investment in educating the market itself, we know that more and more individuals are making the switch towards leasing due to its benefits, but this can be helped by better explaining the product in dealerships, for example, and even improve the technology provided with the vehicle offered, like telematics, for example, in order to increase the quality of service that the end user benefits of. And all in all, I believe that private leasing is in full ascension and represents and will remain one of the main focus area for the major players in the market. And this is from my side for the day. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Octavian Chelu of Frost & Sullivan. Thank you for your insights, Octavian. And I can imagine that our audience already has some questions. If you do so, please use the chat function to share your question with us and with the expert speakers, because at the end of this webinar, there is a Q&A round in which the experts will answer your questions. Now, after the general picture, it's good to understand why and how a lease company embraces private leasing. And Arval is one of the biggest and most experienced international lease companies, and they have developed a wide range of solutions, and also private leasing is in the lease environment. And today with us is Lakshmi Moorthy. She is SME and Private Lease Director, and she will tell us a little bit more how Arval sees private leasing as an important pillar of their future leasing business. Lakshmi?
Thanks, Stephen, and good afternoon to everybody. So in fact, Octavian has already shown us how private lease is an increasing trend, driven among other things by an increasing trend from ownership towards usage. What I will talk about for the next few minutes is what implications this trend has for companies and how they can also have a role in this trend and can be part of and in fact leverage this trend. So at Arval, we work a lot with large companies for our company car programs. And for the past 2-3 years, what we are beginning to observe is that many of these companies are asking us more and more for this product. So they're asking us not just for a company car program, which is what they do, but also asking us how they can think about private lease for the rest of their employees. So for the employees who are not eligible for company cars. So we see a trend and we see an increasing demand from the companies themselves, possibly triggered by an increasing demand from those employees. And if we pause for a minute and think about why is that, it's quite natural. If you work for a company but aren't eligible for a company car, you have probably observed and been aware of all the benefits that some of your colleagues are getting, which is basically an all-inclusive package that is completely hassle-free. Or they may have experienced it themselves in a previous role in a previous company. And what we see is as people become more open to usage, they look around and they say, what can I get? Which I don't get by virtue of my professional needs. I'm not a company car eligible employee, but could I get access to a similar level and quality of service? So we think that's what is triggering this demand, the need for all-inclusive services. And indeed, Octavian has spoken about how with a private lease offer, the person gets to drive for a fixed rental a month and all the hassle of insurance, assistance, repairs, maintenance is handled by somebody else. It's also interesting to see who are the kinds of employees who may be interested in this kind of product. And this is where, again, referring back a little bit to what Octavian was talking about, we see multiple segments who are interested. Yes, there are the young and the first-time buyers who don't want to buy a car. Their first car even is something that they're happy to use and lease. But then you also have the first-time lessees. You have people who are slightly older, maybe lived in an urban area, now have a family, want a bigger car, want to move out to the suburbs, and they think for this next car in their life, they think about leasing, again, to be hassle-free because they're at a stage of life where they want something convenient. It could be people switching out from salary sacrifice programs, either because, and I know in some countries and in some companies, you offer salary sacrifice programs already for your non-eligible employees. In some cases, companies stop offering these schemes, and so the employees are looking for other offers. Or it could be that the salary sacrifice scheme doesn't meet the needs of these employees, and they start looking for private lease. It could be a manager who has a company car, but is looking for a second car for the family. So there are various use cases, there are various segments, and clearly there is this demand, and we're beginning to see it. Now, if we look at the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what Stephen referred to as matchmaking. So indeed, private lease is a trend. It's offered through various channels. A company is one of the ways through which a private lease offer could be made. And why should a company think about it? It's that matchmaking role. So it's first of all, it's very important to explain that in an employee lease, the main private lease contract is between the employee and the leasing company. That is the contract that drives that private lease offer. So what's the role of the company here? The biggest role of the company is choosing to offer this or not, depending on their HR policy. Some companies in the war to attract and retain talent know that every additional benefit you can offer helps to keep your employees with you and to keep them satisfied. And that's really the role of the company, choosing whether to offer a scheme or not. And once you do that, typically the relation between the company and the leasing company or the supplier is very, very light. You might put a broad framework. You might talk about your CSR policy and what kinds of powertrains you would like. You might talk about what segments of employees you want to open this to. But really, it's a very light framework because the true contract is between the employee and the leasing company. And again, just to recap, this is not a substitute for a company car program. It is one component of your overall mobility offer that you make available to your non-eligible company employees. It's for offering your employees who aren't eligible an attractive offer. It could be to replace a salary sacrifice scheme because you've chosen to move out of it due to the administrative burden. Or it could be for the benefit car drivers who actually don't take a car but take cash. It is to make an offer for these kinds of segments. It's not to replace your company car drivers with a private lease, because I'll talk about this at the end. The products are different, and it's important to understand these are two different segments with two different needs. Just on the next slide, to give you a very concrete view on what kinds of reasons, again, we are finding our customers, our corporate customers consider it. We've spoken about the employee. Clearly, it's access to an alternative solution versus ownership. It's benefiting from a hassle-free, all-inclusive package. We've spoken a lot about that. But it's also important to say that a lot of these employees cannot access some of the best offers in the market in their capacity. You as a company have a relation with a leasing supplier, and you have the power to make available some offers which they would not get in their own right. So again, it's part of what you make available to somebody who works for you as one of the benefits of working for your company. For the companies, of course, it's the basic need is keeping employees satisfied. And indeed, if you ask your HR colleagues, for most of them, the biggest reason to offer this would be to attract and to retain talent. And then the next biggest reason is the third bullet on the right. If you run a salary sacrifice scheme, your CFO and your finance department know it has a certain amount of administrative work. There is payroll to be managed, salaries to be deducted. For employees who leave the company, you need to figure out how to return the car. There is an administrative burden. And in many companies, they don't want to continue with salary sacrifice schemes if the tax regime no more favors it. So again, it depends on the administrative burden, the tax benefit, and in some cases, companies choose to replace a salary sacrifice program with a private lease, employee lease program. And of course, for the leasing company, such as ourselves at Arval, this is a fantastic opportunity, A, to bring a better offer for the corporate customers. It's one more product in the lineup of products you could give a corporate customer, but also your employees are a very attractive potential base for leasing companies to sell private lease to. So these are all the reasons, and indeed, as Stephen said, it is a win-win where all three entities get something out of it. And for certain companies, this absolutely should be one of the things that you would want to look at. To end on the last slide, I had said that it's important to understand the difference, and indeed, I thought I'd take a few minutes to explain how an employee private lease scheme is not the same as a company car scheme. So first of all, the makes and models. In a company car scheme, you are looking at cars for business use, whether they are, even if they're benefit cars, often you have made a careful selection based on certain criteria. In an employee scheme, the criteria are completely different. You're looking at cars that are suitable for personal use. Often they're smaller, with very low mileages. So again, the powertrain, it could be more petrol, for example. So the makes and models are different from what we offer typically in a company car. Pricing will be different, including the fact that the discounts that are available for private lease would be different from what you as a company typically negotiate with your OEMs, where some of you negotiate a B2B tripartite discount. The OEMs make available attractive offers for private lease, so there will always be good offers for your employees, but they will not be the same as what you offer on your company car scheme. The services as well could be very different. When you run a company car scheme, you want to maintain business continuity for that employee. You want to make sure they're on the road in as comfortable and reliable a way as possible. Mileages are much higher. You want to offer a high service of a relief car because you don't want time lost. When you look at a private lease, we have to remember it's the employee paying from their own pocket. Services need to be at the right level for them so that it's an affordable package. It's always a full service of packages, but for example, the mileages would be much lower, which in turn brings down the rental and the affordability goes up. So it's always with all services, but the level and the nature of the service is adapted in a private lease scheme. Of course, it goes without saying the contractual relation and risk is with the employee, so it's less administration for the company. Equally, it means that each of your employees is reviewed and underwritten and selected in their own right, and so the risk and the contractual relation is with the employee, not with the company. Finally, what I'd really stress is that the employee lease scheme is a consumer product. In some countries, it's even regulated. And as a result, it's key that these customers are treated by internal teams within the leasing company who know how to specialize and know how to handle consumers. So whether it is making sure they understand what they're buying, being able to deal with complaints in a retail environment, knowing what consumer law says and doesn't say, all that is important. And therefore, internally, most leasing companies will not have the same team handling a private lease scheme as manages a company car scheme. So hopefully that's given you a flavor. And just to end, employee lease schemes we think are very important to consider in your overall benefit that you offer your employees. But it is not a substitute for a company car. It's a different offer for a very different target base. Thank you very much for listening. Stephen, I'll pass back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lakshmi Moorthy. It's clear that Arval is well prepared for the transformation of vehicle leasing with B2B and B2E solutions, including private leasing. So if you have a question for Lakshmi and Octavian, please use the chat function of the webinar tool, as at the end we will have a Q&A round with our experts. Now, when we talk about an emerging fleet management or lease topic, it's always important to hear the voice of the customer, to understand why and how a company goes for that hot pressing topic, in this case, private leasing. And so we are really pleased that Carsten Esbach of BNP Paribas Germany could join. So Carsten is the COO, and his company has already implemented the private leasing solution for employees non-eligible of a company car. Carsten, it's great that you are with us, and we hope that you can hear us.
Yes, absolutely. Many thanks, Stephen. Thanks for having me here, and good afternoon to all the participants. My pleasure to talk about the employee leasing scheme at BNP Paribas in Germany. So, give you a background. We have around 5,000 employees in Germany, more than 5,000 employees in Germany, with a wide range of company cars. And of course, we were also ones who have abandoned the salary sacrifice scheme due to the administrative burden, some other restrictions which we have, and we were also looking for some kind of addition for our benefit package. And when Arval approached us on this topic, of course, we thought this was a really good opportunity to provide a benefit to our employees, and we rolled it out in 2016. What do we offer to our employees? The full service leasing package, as you can see on the slide on the upper right. I think it's particularly interesting for the employees just because it's a broad range of brands and models, so they have really the opportunity to find something they want and which is convenient for them. And we saw earlier on which are the reasons for getting this in place, and we see also that our employees use this in a wide range, be it for the children, be it for the spouse, or for some other reason. So it really offers opportunity. We opened up this program to all our employees with a permanent contract, and after the legal probational period of 6 months in Germany. And when you see what is in, you see that it's really the full range of topics you can get apart from fuel. So to get the repair, maintenance, the winter tires, the hotline, the tax, the delivery, registration, and there's also some flexibilities on the duration of the contract, as well as the insurance service. So if we move on to the next slide, you will then see that, of course, we want to have a convenient and transparent process, so that we also keep things really light for our employees, which means, of course, they can go to the configurator, look at their car, and get a quote from Arval. Of course, then they define the mileage and the duration of the contract, then send the necessary documents for the credit check, sign the lease contract, get the car, and can move forward. So all in a light process for our employees, very convenient, very easy, which of course also increases the acceptance. What we of course also have done, and I think that's important for anyone who considers it, is that we have beforehand organized roadshows in order to make this transparent, that our employees understand what it is all about, that they can test it, they can use it, and they get a grip on the thing, which is, as I can only confirm, a growing market, but not yet so known to the employees, but will be something which is much appreciated. If we move on to the next slide, we will see what the advantages are, and I think this is something which also Lakshmi and Octavian have been referring to, and what we have seen earlier on. So you have a projectable monthly cost. I think that's something which is important. Also an attractive offer and campaign. We also support this for our employees, that we give a one-time payment of a minor amount in order to support this to Arval, and then they can offer better rates. Of course, the client does not have the residual value risk, which is of course something which is also considered these days, where some uncertainty at people's level, what is going to happen to their cars with all the topics going on in Germany and the car manufacturing. As I said, we have a broad choice of makes and brands and models, so really you get almost everything you want if you're willing to pay for it. Yeah, I spoke about the small contribution, and we advertise via the Paribas sticker on the car. The individualization is important, and of course the employee has only Arval as the counterparty, so it's also at the discretion of the employees how they do it. And of course we do not care what the employee does and which car they go for, so that it remains also neutral, and they have of course also the opportunity to get what they want with no down payment, no capital commitment, and of course they can return the car with a certified return process, so it remains really convenient. And if you want to have a structured approach for your car usage, then it's certainly something which is interesting. And I can also say that the demand on our employee side has been rather high. A lot of people looking at this, testing out, checking, and of course they appreciate the opportunity to get this in their package. And as also said, we did not do any restrictions for our populations, so everybody is in principle after the 6-month period eligible to that. For us as employer, of course, as BNP Paribas in Germany, we think this is indeed an increased employee motivation and retention. This is something which we offer, which is something a bit out of the ordinary. Also knowing that Germans and their cars have a special relationship, and it's important. We think that is something which is much appreciated, which is also something, of course, which we can offer in the recruiting phase when we are asked about our benefits, something we can offer to the people. The minimized administration is something which I mentioned at the very beginning, is something which I took particularly attention to, just because this is something which we saw with the salary sacrifice scheme, which is burdening the HR, the finance. On the other hand, also is a question what happens to the cars when the employee quits. And I think this is also something which is advantageous for the company as well as for the employee. Should the employee change company, of course, the contract remains intact. And this is something we like, that we don't have to think about what we would do with the cars once the employment should end for whatever reason. And the outsourcing of financial risk, no necessity to build a fleet, which I think is anyway something we have done and almost all the others have done for our company cars. That the name of the game is, of course, full service leasing, also for the company cars, in order to really reduce also our internal burden and to give to the experts what the experts are best at. We're running a financial institution and we're not running a leasing company. So this is what Arval can do best. And I think we're well served to give this to somebody who really knows what they're doing. So all in. And with this, I would like to close and thank you for your attention. All in is something which has been really shown in the 2 years which we are currently running. Has really shown great success. Has shown a lot of positive feedback from the employees. Has not shown a single case where we had issues which came up to my attention at least. So definitely can only underline that this is a model for the future, and it is no surprise to me that the market is growing and that there's increasing demand, be it on the employee and the employer side. Many thanks again, and back to you, Stephen.
Carsten, thank you. Thank you very much for the insight in how you have dealt with private leasing at BNP Paribas, Germany. If you have a question for Carsten, you can send it, of course, via the chat function, because we are going to start with the final part of this Fleet Europe webinar with the support of Arval, and that is our Q&A round. You see our three experts in front of you. We have Octavian Chelu of Sullivan, Lakshmi Moorthy of Arval, and Carsten Esbach of BNP Paribas Germany. And you can send your questions using the chat function. Let's start. A question to Octavian, perhaps, is Octavian, can you a little bit tell us how private leasing as a new lease formula can impact the market, the used car market, and residual values?
That's quite a question, Stephen. Well, the easy answer is that there is no easy answer, actually. What I see as a first split of the answer is a twofold. First of all, I see that, for example, private leasing and for a used car market can provide the opportunity to leasing providers on one hand to address a market segment that is not necessarily looking into paying the full price for a new vehicle, but are okay to use a vehicle that is a couple of years old in good condition with complete history and so on. And from a provider point of view, it can generate additional revenues, especially if that vehicle is highly equipped, for example, and only reselling it would not provide a high profit margin. What I mean by this is that you can have a high-end vehicle with high-end equipment and so on, and after a leasing contract, reselling it, it might not bring you a lot of profit as a financing company, and you would rather have that particular vehicle back into the circuit, and then we're talking about the used vehicle leasing. With regards to the residual values, just a couple of words over here. What we see happening is more and more leasing companies basically jumping upon this boat, which is private leasing for used car types. And that happens lately because of the increasing accuracy of the internal tools they have in order to determine the residual values for vehicles that are going into a second life in leasing. And this is something that we do assume from a Frost & Sullivan perspective that is going to increase as well. So the number of leasing and used car leasing is going to increase in the future as well.
Okay, a question for Lakshmi from an international corporate fleet manager. I am just trying to find the question. There it is. Lakshmi, you mentioned clearly that the private leasing scheme that we discussed here is for people, employees that are not eligible for a company car. So it has nothing to do with replacing, let's say, a company car scheme. The question is straightforward. Why do companies then need a framework agreement between themselves and the leasing company in case of private leasing? Can't it be just, let's say, be discussed and handled between the employee and the leasing company?
That's a very good question. And in fact, when I say framework, I should even clarify, we're not talking any contractual structure. But often what happens is and I can give you real life examples from companies we talk to. Sometimes, for examples, they may have a CSR policy, and they may say, we don't want to be promoting certain kinds of cars to our employees. Fair enough. For us, it's important to know what is that framework, because you play matchmaker. You have the right, and often you have a policy. It's like any other HR benefit policy and package that you put in front of your employees. Companies that are very health focused offer free subscriptions to gyms or discounts on sports equipment. It goes with your company principles, the ethos, and the image that you want to have of your company. So the framework is mostly along those lines. Often it will talk about the way you can communicate. So for example, how would you like to make the scheme known to your employees? Do you want an event in the cafeteria once a month? Do you want posters? Are you willing to attach flyers with the salary slips? It's more along how to communicate. If there is some broad framework we need to be aware of, such as your CSR policy, it's nothing more than that. The third element I would add is a high level of reporting. You may want once a quarter to know how many of your employees have taken up the scheme, so that we know whether it's working at all or not. We never divulge details of the individuals, and as Carsten said, it's never talking about a particular contract or a car. It's more to say, if you are going to talk to my employees, here's the tone and here are the broad things to be aware of.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Lakshmi, another question is, this private lease solution, do you already offer it in all your 20 plus markets?
That's a good question. No, we don't. We offer it in most of our major markets, and we are very driven by the market readiness. So we spoke about the UK, the Netherlands is another country. So that's at one extreme. And then at the other end, we have some countries where operational leasing is not even very prevalent among very small companies or professionals, leave alone individuals. So today, Arval, and again, just to explain, I think this is true for many other leasing companies. We offer private lease in most of the markets where we see there is a demand. But no, there are some countries, especially outside Europe, where today we don't see a demand, and today we don't offer the product. The roadmap for Arval, and I'm sure for other leasing companies, keeps evolving. Mm-hmm. As the trend for operational lease goes further down in terms of size of companies to self-employed and professionals, and eventually to individuals, I'm sure the availability of the product will also reach all countries.
Okay, another question, perhaps to start with you, Lakshmi, and perhaps Carsten can do the follow-up, is one where risk is involved. How about user bankruptcy, unpaid invoices, etc.? Would the employer be a guarantee party for the contract in that case, or would it still stay between, let's say, the leasing company and the employee?
Absolutely, all risk and the contractual relation is with the employee. So this is why, for example, I mentioned this is run by a specialist team within Arval who can underwrite individuals. And indeed, we are aware not just how to underwrite them, but we also have to be aware of responsible lending. So making sure that an employee with an inadequate salary who will not be able to service this agreement should not be granted, this contract. So absolutely all risk is at the employee level, and that risk is borne by the leasing company. The company, the employer, has no risk, provides no guarantees, and is not on the hook at all.
Okay, so this means, Carsten, that you are safe from your side if someone of your employees should not be able to pay the bill.
Absolutely, and this is one of the reasons I like the scheme very much, just because, as Lakshmi said, it leaves us completely out of the process. we don't care about what the guys are doing with their money, but Arval is looking at it that we don't have people ruining themselves, at least not with the car, but they may ruin themselves with other things. But that's really the beauty of the whole thing for the employer.
Okay, and a follow-up question for you, Carsten. Let's say, other than proposing a nice human resources service, an extra benefit for perhaps those people that can't use a company car, how is there money to make? Is it a benefit also for the company, next to, let's say, that it's an attractiveness for the employee? Is it also something that is cost beneficial for you, or is it, let's say, neutral?
Now, for us, it's neutral, and I think it's in this respect cost beneficial, of course, that we save all the effort with a possible sacrifice scheme. On the one hand. On the other hand, which I think is also interesting, we're just saying this is for the population which is not company car eligible. We, of course, also have people who use this as a second car, so they may be company car eligible, but give them a set to their children or to their spouses or whatsoever, which is really positive and has also been well perceived by the people. But our aim is not to make money out of this. Our aim is really to grant our people an opportunity to drive the car they want, to have the benefits, and I think that's also something which is the more and more important for us to position ourselves as an employer, to see how people react on us and how they are attracted to their employer. Just because what we see, and this is a quite obvious statement, is of course that in the current market we face, we have an undersupply of good people, so we really have to think about how we differentiate ourselves, and this helps to recruit better people. There's also, of course, also a fiscal advantage or a financial advantage, which is not immediately visible, but will pay out in the longer run.
Okay. Lakshmi, you mentioned that in the scheme, when an employee leaves the company, that the car follows the employee, because the contract is between the leasing company and the employee. Now, if that is the case, the employee leaves the company, does the employee also keeps the same conditions for the private lease scheme, or will this be recalculated?
No, typically because if we go back to the matchmaker principle, the role of the company is not to define the specific employee lease offer, but only put some broad guidelines. So the product is absolutely what we are willing to give that individual employee, irrespective of where they work. So if they quit the company and they go to another job, or God forbid, they don't even have a job for a while, we have looked at that individual in their own right and assessed their capability to have this contract and under those conditions. So there is no need for automatically changing any terms of that contract. Now, it could be that the employee may say, my salary's gone up or down, I want to take my mileage up or down, the duration extend or not. So we could recontract, as indeed we recontract in other cases as well, but it would not be necessary. It would be at the insistence of the employee if they wanted to change something. Automatically, there is no need to change anything. The contract is between us and the employee, irrespective of where they work, and there is no need to change anything.
Okay, very good. A question for Octavian. Octavian, at the beginning of your presentation, when you talked a little bit about the evolution of private leasing at the country level, we saw some figures about the big European markets. You talked a little bit about, let's say, the less mature European markets. But what we saw was also in the prediction of Frost and Sullivan that, let's say, the average penetration of private lease for Germany is going to decrease by 10%. Why is that the case?
I would say it's not necessarily a decrease so much in terms of product adoption, but it's mainly a decrease due to the higher number of new registered vehicles that are going to be on the road. So I think these two somehow need to complete each other, if you'd like. So that's why I was also mentioning that it looks like there is a lot of room to grow for players like Arval and the other leasing companies as well, to push even harder for this product, because there is a lot of room in the market. With regards to the product adoption as well, I mentioned something along the lines of credit and interest rate, which that can also have something to do with the overall adoption rate of private lease, especially if you talk about very good conditions when taking a credit and so on. You might still have a big chunk of the population going towards that type of financing, only because at the end of the contract it also provides you with the ownership of the vehicle. So when you have these two combined, most of the time people are going to go to a different type of financing.
Okay, very good. A question perhaps for Carsten. Carsten, you made, let's say, the private lease offering open for all employees that are at least 6 months within your company and that don't have a company car. Did you, let's say, create a sort of a car policy specially dedicated to the private lease scheme? Or was that not the case?
No, this was not the case. We left it completely open. We relied on the catalog Arval was offering. We, of course, said that we want to have an attractive offer from our side. What we did is that at the beginning there was a limited number of cars where we thought the offer was particularly attractive due to the market positioning of Arval and the ability to create attractive purchase prices and then from that attractive leasing rates. What we then saw was that the demand in our employeeship was much more diverse, and we got very quickly requests to open up and to enhance the catalog of cars, which then led us to the fact that we say, okay, in principle you can price any car and then the employee can make their own choice. So everything which is in the catalog of Arval is possible, and we didn't make a differentiation neither if the people would go for diesel cars, fuel cars, or electro cars or hybrid cars. So we leave this entirely at the discretion of the employer to get to an agreement and to think about what fits and what they're prepared to pay for which kind of car.
Okay, very good. Lakshmi, can you tell who is your counterpart to negotiate the conditions for this B2B2E, let's say, scheme? Is it the private customer or is it the company? And if it's the company, whom in the company? Is it the human resources department? Is it, let's say, the fleet manager? Is it someone else?
So absolutely. So I think of it as a two-step process. The first one is the matchmaking, as you call it. So the first step is where we discuss with the company, do you want us, do you have a need for an employee lease scheme? And here the counterparts, often it's multifunctional on the company side and often on our side as well. HR is always involved, and often the communications teams may also be involved, especially internal communications. So typically it's a multifunctional team on the employees, on the company side, always with the fleet manager, because often he or she is the person who knows Arval best and acts as a bit of a facilitator. But there will be multiple functions, especially HR and sometimes internal communications on the corporate side, who sit with us to agree such a scheme. Then once we have agreed it, again, internal communications is often involved because we decide how we are going to make this offer known and aware in the employee base. Once we've done that, when we have individual inquiries, they come straight through to Arval. The company is not involved at all. So typically there will be an email address or a phone number, and people will then call up Arval directly, our private lease team, and talk to them. So at an individual contract level, the company is not involved at all. At the start, they are involved more about how to promote this, etc.
Okay, two more questions. The first one is for Carsten. Carsten, there are quite a few people in the webinar room who would like to know, you started your scheme, your private lease scheme in 2016. Can you give them an idea about how big the population is and how many contracts do you have in place after, let's say, 12 or 24 months?
So, as said, the population we are addressing are around more than 5,000 people. And what I can say is that there have been a lot of requests. I think a large 3-digit number, at least to calculate cars, and we have a smaller 3-digit number of actual private leases which have been made.
Okay.
So all in, very, very attractive, much appreciated by the people, and we have a number, a 3-digit number, which is pretty much above 100.
Okay. A question to Octavian. Octavian, can you say that this private lease scheme is a little bit what is also quite popular, for example, in Australia, the product that is called novated lease, where there is also a triangle, let's say, between the lease company, the employer, and the employee, or has it nothing to do with that?
Well, there are similarities, Stephen, that's for sure. I mean, if we are looking at novated lease in Australia, definitely you can find a lot of similarities. So I would say the core of the product that it's in discussion today looks a lot like a novated lease, but it's adapted to the European standards, let's put it like that. So I would not necessarily draw a parallel, but definitely there are things that the two products have in common, which is not a bad thing. I mean, we are not discussing here if one is better than the other. It's just, you know, how it can be adopted better at the local level. And I think in Europe, so far, we see a very healthy development of it.
Okay. The final question is for Lakshmi. Lakshmi, people are questioning if, for example, in your private lease offering, you are also, or you can also, let's say, put and promote EV vehicles.
Absolutely. So we do offer electric vehicles as well as part of our generic private lease offer, and hence as part of what we could offer in an employee scheme as well. Absolutely.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to finish here. There were some more questions that we will share with our experts, and we hope to come back with answers on those questions on our fleeteurope.com website, where the experts can hopefully share insights also on the outstanding questions at the moment. But we have to end. So I would like to thank all expert speakers, Octavian, Lakshmi, and Carsten. Thank you very much for your expertise and your insights. And of course, our partner for this webinar, Arval. Thank you very much for the support. As mentioned, there will be a recorded version of the webinar, and we will that make available online on our website. And also, we will send you a little satisfaction survey in order to help us improve our future webinars. So for the rest, I hope that you have another great day. Thank you very much, and hopefully until soon. Bye-bye.